I want to thank you all for coming. It's not a really large group. Let's be interactive until we're running out of time. So if you have a question, don't feel like you can interrupt me. Ask the question, we can talk about it. And if I see that I'm just not going to be able to cover the things I want to cover, then I'll apologize that I won't be able to take any more questions during the talk, and we'll keep moving it along. I looked at my badge today, right? And it says, Thomas Kost, not applicable. I have to tell you that I believe what I'm going to talk about today will be applicable to most folks. And for those of you that have come, I hope you really get some good tips that you could use in the future when you're putting talks together. I never got these when I first started giving talks, and I could have used them. There's no doubt about that. So hopefully you'll get some valuable information. That's me, a little bit about me. My name is Tom Kost. I worked for 26 years at GlaxoSmithKline in North Carolina. And I left there about 3 or 4 years ago. I was a molecular biologist, virologist working in the early drug discovery process. And then I had the luck to move to Colorado. So now I live in Golden, Colorado, outside of Denver. This picture is Rocky Mountain National Park this year when the road just opened. So this was just a couple days after they plowed the road, and I just think it's quite an amazing picture. So we drove up to this spot where the picture was taken. Love Colorado. Another Colorado picture. My neighbor took this. Her name's on the bottom right, Debbie Hunt. And I just think it's just a beautiful picture of one of the animals in Colorado. And let me step back a second. So I said I spent 26 years at GlaxoSmithKline. So what gives me the right to be up here to tell you how to give better talks, right? I've also spent about 20 years in an organization called Toastmasters International. Yeah, I see a couple Toastmasters, and I'll give it a plug at the end, but it is one of the best places you could actually learn to become a more proficient speaker. And at Toastmasters International, I got their highest level award, which is called Distinguished Toastmaster. My wife calls it Director of Trash Management. Tuesdays. Today, you're here for the meeting. 144 podium presentations, workshops, other presentations. I calculate that about 3,500 slides are going to be shown this week. 3,500 slides. And most of those slides, many of them, you won't see any white space on them. You'll see a lot of material. How you can grasp all that, I never know. It's just going to be so much information. Remember this, I break down preparing and giving talks into 3 things: preparation, organization, and presentation or delivery. But I like this because it pops, right? And my analogy for this is, think of building a house. You prepare building a house by putting together plans on the top left. And then you take those plans and you get a builder, and the builder's got to put the structure in place, the framing of the house. And then finally, after a lot of trials and tribulations, because we built our house in Colorado, you have the finished product, and that I think of as the delivery. So I believe this is a pretty good analogy to think about when you're building a talk. You have to do quite a bit of planning up front to get down to a finished product in the end. So as far as the preparation, what are the key points? Number 1, most important, right? How many of us procrastinate? Me. There's not many hands in this room that aren't going up. So if you could beat procrastination, you're pretty far along. Because if you're scheduled to go to a meeting and give a talk a month from now, I suspect most of the people in this room are working hard on it that last week. You have to start early. Just put some time aside, little by little, to start working on thinking about your presentation. Because procrastination is what will kill you, essentially, in making your presentation. Next most important thing is the audience. I bet that most people, when they have to give a talk, one of the first things they think about is, what am I going to say? What am I going to talk about? What am I going to do? And it is you that's going to give the presentation, but it's a two-way street, and you really need to think about your audience. That's one of the most important messages I could give you today is when you ever have to make a presentation, think about who your audience is. It's not the same at a conference versus doing a job interview, doing a department meeting. They're all different audiences, and they all need a little bit more preparation and different preparation. Next important thing, what's your story, right? What's your message? You ever heard a talk where someone throws up the last slide and they say summary and there's 7 or 8 bullet points? How many people have seen that? Right. You remember anything? Unless that's probably what you're working on and you're really interested in that talk, you're going to leave that room and an hour later you won't even remember what the person said. Too much stuff. My background, again, is molecular biology, virology, so I've done research, and I know that when a person does research, they want to talk about it. And they want to talk about everything they've done because they're proud. You're always proud of what you've worked on. If you've been working on a project 3 years, you got a lot of data, and you want to spill the beans. But that audience you're usually talking to isn't as familiar with what you're going to talk about as you are. So you really have to, in that preparation stage, think, what are the key messages I want the people in the audience to go away with? And as I have on this slide, well, I don't have it on this slide, but you don't want more than 3. Maybe 1. 1's probably better, but you don't want more than 3 messages. So of all your work, think about what is the most important thing or things, no more than 3, that I want to tell that audience. And that's hard because you've got so many reams of data and so much stuff. But really try to focus it down because if you don't, you're just going to try and pack too much into your presentation. You ever seen this quote by Blaise Pascal? I would have written a shorter, I put the clearer letter, but I didn't have the time. That goes back again to procrastination. If you create yourself time, you'll have time to write that shorter presentation. And it's harder to give a shorter presentation. It's harder to give a 10-minute presentation or 15 than it is 45 because you have to boil it down again to those key messages. How many times can I say it? Key messages, no more than 3. And as I talked about, you need to know your audience. Know as much as you can about their demographics, know as much as you can about their knowledge level, and most importantly, what are they expecting? And that's not always easy because you get invited to go somewhere and give a talk, and you don't exactly know who that audience is going to be composed of. But do some research as much as you can on Google, wherever else you could get information, to get a sense of who your audience is and what's important to them, right? What's the real football? I love this example of an audience. If you're in Philadelphia now, football is the real football, right? Or in the United States, football is the real football. If you're in Europe, the one on the right with Messi is real football. So you could be talking about something and people may be reading it entirely different than you're talking about it. So you have to be careful with some of the words you choose, and knowing your audience is certainly going to help that aspect. I was coming into this room, and Steve Reese, I don't know if anybody knows Steve Reese, but Steve Reese works for AstraZeneca, and he was telling me how at AstraZeneca, words mean very different things than they did when he worked at GlaxoSmithKline. Different audience again, it's a different group of people. So you need to know who you're speaking to. When you're selecting your key messages, be audience-centric. It's not what you want to tell the audience, it's what the audience really is hoping to receive. That's the most important thing. You have your story, but if your story doesn't match what that audience is looking for, then it's not going to be heard. I said it again, don't talk about everything and focus on 3 or fewer messages. Lily Walters said, the success of your presentation will be judged not by the knowledge you send, but by what the listener receives. Just like today. I can blah, blah up here for 40, 45 minutes about speaking tips. But if you don't go out of the room with some tips at least, then I didn't do a good job. It's what the audience walks away with that's important. It's a two-way street communication. It's talking and listening. Let's jump now to, so preparation. Let's sum up preparation real quick. Know your audience. Focus down to 1 to 3 key messages you want to give to that audience. Organize. Develop a catchy opening. If you get up there, you don't catch the attention of that audience pretty quickly, they're gone. Especially in the age of cell phones, laptop computers, social media. You know, everybody's checking their Facebook, and they're checking their Twitter account, and they're checking their text messages constantly, right? And that's what you're competing with when you're giving a presentation. Order and support your key points. If you have 3 key points, put them out in a rational order, and then support them with the data that you have. Pretty simple. Don't go off course too much. Just keep your message be very focused. And then build a memorable ending. Because what do people remember the most? The end. Many times people won't remember actually what your catchy opening was, but they'll walk away from the presentation with what you left them with in the end. That's what they're going to remember. Tell a story. That one's a hard one. There's no doubt in my mind that to give a scientific presentation, it's not that easy to meld a story around that, but try. Because if people love to hear stories, if you have an anecdote, a little anecdotal story, maybe about something that happened in the lab, something that you could personalize your presentation with, put it in there, and you'll see people connect with that, right? Because we all have feelings, at least most of us, and you'll connect with personal stories. So wherever you can interject that, that's great. Be careful with transitions in your talk. If you have 3 messages, you need to delineate them for people, because they may not know, they may lose track of where you're going through the presentation if you don't properly kind of delineate your 3 messages. So transitions are an important thing to think about. And remember, always keep this in mind, as I said before, the audience is hearing your presentation for the first time, unless you're a speaker who goes around to like 50 meetings and gives the same presentation. But in general, it's the first time people are hearing it, and they need time to digest it. They can't take an overload, even if they're pretty familiar with the subject. 30 million. What's 30 million? This is the estimate of how many PowerPoint presentations are given every single day in the world. 30 million. I don't know how I know the guy did some kind of calculation to come up with this, but he's probably right on when you think about it. 30 million a day, and then they talk about death by PowerPoint. little film.
There's some things I hate about PowerPoint, and I figure it's kind of my duty to point them out. So here we go. Here's common PowerPoint mistakes. Number one, people tend to put every word they are going to say on their PowerPoint slides. Although this eliminates the need to memorize your talk, ultimately this makes your slides crowded, wordy, and boring. You will lose your audience's attention before you even reach the bottom of your first slide. Please don't do that anymore, please. Number two, most common, many people do not run spell check. Big mistake. Nothing makes you look stupider than spelling errors. If it's got a red line under it, recheck the spelling. And finally, I hate this. Avoid excessive bullet pointing, only bullet key points. Too many bullet points, and your key messages will not stand out. In fact, the term bullet point comes from people firing guns at annoying presenters. Hence the bullet point. Bad color schemes, not good. Clashing background and font colors can lead to distraction, confusion, headache, nausea, vomiting, and loss of bladder control. I can't stay on that one too long. Here's something I've noticed. The number of PowerPoint slides you have in your talk, the less useful your talk actually is. Unfortunately, my presentation is right there. I've also noticed this. People love to pack data into their presentations. They just shove more and more data thinking it's better, but it's not. The more data you have, the harder it is to read your slide, and the effectiveness plummets. Now you can improve the effectiveness by adding some shading and some 3D effects, and then some second order and third order effects, and then, I know, let's add some labels. That'll help a lot. And that's pretty much every marketing slide I've ever seen right there. Yeah. Then some like VP of marketing standing there going, it's real clear in Q4. What the hell are you talking about? Now, I'm into in animation. People become animators in PowerPoint. You can have things flying all over the place, and that can be good. If you're a visual learner, that will improve the effectiveness of your performance. But if you're easily distracted, more animations, and people have no idea what you're talking about. They're just, wow, that is cool, wow. And there's regions here, by the way. There's the simple but effective region. There's the active but confusing, the effective but boring, the active but ineffective, the dull but static region, the busy but useless, the ADD only region, the useful but amusing, the stupid but confusing, the dull triangle, the hyper triangle, the sleepy square, the dizzying pentagon, and everything else I just call pointless motion. That slide right there took me an hour and a half to make, right there. PowerPoint can just suck the life out of you. It's amazing. I've also come up with this. It's a kind of a little science I've invented called font analysis. Basically, the font you choose says something about who you are as a person. There's a huge list of fonts, and you choose one, and that says something about you. So be careful the font you choose. For example, if you choose Courier New, it happens to be my favorite, you're probably organized and structured. If you choose Matisse, it means you're artistic. And if you choose Times New Roman, it means you're lazy, apathetic, and unimaginative, and you always use the default. Oh.
That's Don McMillan. He lives in California. He has a master's degree in electrical engineering, and now this is what he does. And he's made a great living out of it. He uses PowerPoint as his stick, and he does comedy. And it is comedy, but it's real too, right? There's a lot of reality in that little 3.5-minute film of what you'll see at the meeting this week. I would say that this slide could be improved. Anybody disagree with that? Okay. At a conference, though, like this, you see many, many slides like this. There's just so much wrong with that slide that could be improved quite simply just by increasing the size of the font, getting rid of a few of the figures. It's just too much stuff again, right? Just too much stuff. PowerPoint slides are made to support your message. They are not the message. What you're saying is the message, and then the slide should be designed and built so it supports what you're saying. When you put a PowerPoint slide up, correct me if I'm wrong, what people do is they look at it, right? We're attuned to our eyes going to that slide. And you're talking, and they're trying to read everything that's on that slide while you're talking, and often they don't hear a word you're saying. And they could read that slide actually faster than you can explain it. So you have to be very careful in composing your slides, not to overload them and leave white space. And they shouldn't be read. I can't even count the number of talks I've gone to in my lifetime where someone stands there like this, and they take a pointer, and they say, PowerPoint slide should support your message, should not be cluttered, should not be read. And you're looking at the person's back. They're talking to the slide, not you. You really need to look at your audience to connect. And I realize that if you have a fair amount of data, you have to look at your slides some, because it's just not always that easy to explain the material if you don't. But you also need to look at your audience. I would say you should aim to look at your slides no more than about 20-25% of the time. And the rest of the time you should be focusing on your audience. If you could look at your audience all the time, that's really good, but you would really have to not procrastinate and practice that talk a lot to get to that point. Keep your slides simple. What I've seen a lot of people do is they'll publish a paper, and then they procrastinate it, so they don't have a lot of time, and they'll go and grab figures out of that paper, right? Just make a cut and paste of a figure that was in the paper. Figures that you put into papers are not made for presentations. The font is usually small. It just doesn't usually work very well. So you either need to take that figure and spend a little time recreating it to put it into a slide, or it's just not going to be able to be seen by folks in the audience. I grabbed this off the web, and it's a little bit blurry. It's a pretty simple slide, but it's a little bit blurry, and you really can't see it all that well. So what I did is I just took that same information and I built the slide myself. And now you could see I've got bigger font. It's much more clear than the one that I just grabbed off the web. So that's the lazy way to do it. But if you want a better figure, you need to spend a bit of time working on it yourself. Keep your charts simple. Moon pie I've eaten, moon pie I haven't eaten. I suspect everybody that looked at that slide within a few seconds gets the picture. And you could make a data slide that simple to make a major point to people. Just one piece of data on the slide, not 3 or 4 figures. I've seen these slides a lot. At the end, somebody throws in a slide that says, thank you. Or they put in a slide that says, questions. Why do you need that? Right? You're going to say thank you. I mean, like throwing a slide up there that says thank you doesn't add a whole lot more to it. It just takes another slide that you have to build. And questions, please. Either the chair of the session is going to ask for questions, or you're going to ask for questions. So you don't need to put these kinds of superfluous things in a talk. I don't have it in here, but one other thing, for those of you who work at institutes and companies who want to put their logo on every single slide somewhere, you know, up in the top left or bottom right, get rid of those logos. They're not going to fire you. I don't think so. I mean, if they're going to fire you, probably leave the logos in. But I don't think they're going to fire you. And the logo adds nothing. Once you've had that on your first slide, everybody knows where you're from, and it just detracts from the message that you're trying to give. So keep extraneous materials off your slides. Things you don't need just don't need to be there. Very important. Remember this one. Just like focus on 1 to 3 messages and know your audience, this is an important one. When you put your PowerPoint presentation together, go into slide sorter view, like I'm showing here. This was just somebody's presentation I captured off the web. And edit, edit, edit. So go through the slides, edit them, put it back into slide sorter view, see if it's getting better, and edit again. You'll always find that you're going to throw some slides away, and you're going to take some materials out of slides. Let me go back and just give you one more thing that I think is good. Don't use hangers, okay? If you're going to give a list of bullet points, I call that one word on the second line a hanger. It's not really a word for that line, but that's what I call it. But if you have a two-line bullet and the second line only has one word, reword it. You don't need to have that one whole line being taken up by a single word. So get rid of your hangers, right? Keep those bullet points to a minimum. Okay, deliver with energy. Sometimes I fall down there a little bit, just to keep that energy up. But if you're not showing energy, how's anybody else going to get energized? Look at this guy. I wish I looked like him. Oh my gosh. Could you just imagine I don't even know what he's saying, but he just looks like he's got the energy, right? Reducing nervousness. We all get nervous when we have to give a talk, right? Is that right? If there's anybody in this room that doesn't get nervous, then that's surprising to me, very surprising. So what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about nervousness? Practice. Probably the best thing you can do, right? Practice. So don't procrastinate. Get your talk done, not the day before you have to give it, but a week or two, and then practice. Keep practicing. Because the more comfortable you feel with your talk, the less nervous you're going to be. What else could you do? Any thoughts? No thoughts.
I try to make myself nervous ahead of time, so when I get up,
Yeah.
it just melts away. If I don't get nervous ahead of time, it hits me suddenly.
I like that, yeah. Another one is get to the room early, right? Simple thing, but if I walk in this room, it's 5 minutes before I'm ready to give my talk, the room's already full of people, I'm trying to get my slides in order, trying to make sure everything's going to work. Whew, that's stressful. So, get to a room 30 minutes before your talk. Even if there's no one in there, you can just sit down, get comfortable with the room, and then hopefully there's some AV people that can come and help you, and you get everything set up and you know it's going to work. So get to the room early. And if you really want to be good at that, talk to a few people coming into the room. Robert there was here very early in this room because he's giving a talk tomorrow, so he gets an A+. But the other thing that did is it let me talk to Robert a little bit, and it made me feel a little more comfortable too. Prepare, practice, get to the room early. Those are three main things. Anybody else have anything that they do or? Mm-hmm.
Keep the first slide or two, very simple.
Right.
So that initial nervousness falls away after the first two slides are simple.
Mm-hmm. That's a good idea. You can memorize your first line, actually memorize your first couple lines or have them written down just to get you started. Laughing. Right. 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 That's good. Along with that then, when you start your talk, look out into the audience and look for a smiling, friendly face. Right? Don't look at people who look like they're growling at you and they're ready to leave before you've started. Look for somebody in the audience that's smiling a bit. And then look at them a number of times. That will make you feel better. But you need to have a little nervousness, because if you don't have a little nervousness, then you're not going to keep that energy up. You won't. So turn your energy, turn that positive energy into your presentation. Said this already. Know the size of the room, layout, lighting, temperature. Temperature to me is an important one, because if I walk in this room and I'm going to give a presentation and it's 75 degrees in here or higher, then I'm going to go try and find somebody to turn that temperature down a little bit, because once people start coming into the room is even going to get warmer. So just these physical things, these details are very important in giving your talk. The bane of talks is the electronics. If you go through an entire talk and all the electronics work fine for you, consider yourself lucky, because it rarely happens. So far, things are going very well here. The video worked, the slides are moving, the volume is good. Often that's not the case. If you're going into a situation where you don't know what is going to be available, I recommend at the least you buy yourself a slide changer, right? So you could take your own with you to the presentation, because you don't want to have to be standing or sitting there and pushing the buttons on the laptop, and that also doesn't let you move around. You're stuck. Pointers on the bottom right. You don't need a pointer. Pointer, right? Pointer. And then you'll see many people like they just do this. Now, if somebody's pointing and they say, this pointer is really important, and they do this, that's not too bad, because it focuses your eyes. But make sure you're not doing this deal where you're just, because people's heads are like spinning, right? I would say, though, that if you make your slides simple enough with a lot of white space, you should rarely need a pointer. How many times have you heard people say, look at only at the top right corner, the graph in the top right corner, because there's 5 graphs on the slide. If you only want me to look at the top right corner, why put the other 4 graphs on the slide? Right? Probably a sign of laziness, that they just didn't need them there and they didn't want to create another slide. Delivery, we're in the house phase now again when you're delivering. Delivery, it's all about delivery. You'll see that what people get out of a presentation is anywhere from 80 to 90% conveyed by the delivery itself and 10% by the actual content. I'm not sure with scientists that's exactly true. I think the ratio's probably skewed somewhat more towards the content. But there's no doubt delivery is important. Look at that woman that I chose up on the top, that nice smiley face. I don't know who she is, but she's pleasant. I mean, she's smiling at me. She's not, as you said, find that friendly face. Bottom, Steve Jobs. He didn't smile that much. I looked at a number of his videos, but he still had his style that made you pay attention to what he was saying, and you could see his hands are up and he's gesturing. One thing about gestures, we're not all made to gesture, right? Some people are talking with their hands all the time, right? And some people talk with them too much, especially in cars when they were driving down the road and on their phone. They're really good. But if you're going to use gestures, try and get your hands up. Don't gesture too much down below your waist. Be expressive. Get your hands out there with big gestures. He's tall. They're small. Things that people really react to. So if you're going to be gestures, use gestures, be expressive with them. Smile, again, that's great. Sometimes I fall down there too, but try to smile. Try to have a friendly face towards people. Very important. And dress. Obviously, I'm dressed well. I was going to wear jeans. That's all I wear in Colorado. Rarely do I wear anything but a pair of jeans in Colorado and my hiking shoes. But if you think about dress, you don't have to dress up spectacularly, but at least if you're kind of in that neutral zone, then people aren't distracted. They're not going to comment that you were dressed like a slob or you were overdressed. So pay attention to the clothing that you wear. I'm just going to say this now because I don't have it on the slide. One other rule I go by is try to be neutral to positive. Okay? When you're giving your talk, you don't know how the other people in the room are thinking. So don't make statements that are too contentious unless you want to be contentious. So you may be thinking in something in your head that you would really like to say, but there may be one person in that audience that's just not going to like that. So try to make your statements to be fairly neutral or on the upslope, but not going down. You don't want to alienate people that are in your audience. I love this one. I mean, if you stare at it long enough, those eyes just they keep coming at you. Where do you think I'm going with this? Eye contact, right? I mean, look at that guy's eyes. And we've talked about this a bit. Eye contact for some people is very difficult. I never forget one time when I was interviewing a person for a job, and she was interviewing with me, and she never looked at me. Never. Every time I'd ask a question, she'd look to the side like this or the side like this, and I started thinking, wow, like, what's wrong with me today? You know, am I like, something wrong here? She just couldn't look at me, and maybe it was me. I don't know, you know. But you have to look at the people you're talking to. If you stand there for 30 minutes with your back to that audience, you're going to have some pretty good data for them to really connect with it. So the best is look at everybody. Try and look at a person for maybe 2 seconds and really make eye contact with them. So don't just like glance at somebody and then go to the next person. Pick someone out, look at them. If you want to make them nervous, you could look at them for 10 seconds. But 2 seconds or so is a good rule. And even if you're in a big room with a couple hundred people, you could kind of keep looking at people throughout that room. And importantly, try not to slight a region of the room. Because that's easy to fall into. You know, you tend naturally, I think, to look a certain way. You have to force yourself to move and look at everyone in the room. As I have on the bottom there, the worst is continuously looking at your slides and just not looking at people. Delivery and voice. Key message with voice. You can never be too loud. Am I loud now for anybody? Too loud? And I'm trying to project here, and I've got a microphone. I could yell louder, but I'm talking quite loudly. So especially for people who have a low voice to begin with, you need to project. And it may sound to you like you're straining and you're being too loud, but you're not, because for a voice to reach from here, even in this room, to 30 to 40 feet to the back, you have to put out a lot of air volume. So think about that when you're talking. You never can be too loud. The louder, in most cases, the better. Tone, you don't like monotone, so you need to go up with your voice, down with your voice. Mostly up. But there may be situations where you want to make a point and you just drop down. But you don't want to keep it at the same tone throughout the whole presentation. Pace is very important. If you're nervous, you tend to talk fast. You want to get the whole darn thing over with and get on to the rest of the day. But, I'll come to that later, people tend to use a lot of filler words also. You ever heard a talk where somebody and so much that you couldn't even listen? No matter how good their stuff was, you just got so distracted by all those ahs and ums. I've had a few of those. And I have to be very careful because of what I do, I tend to really pay attention to it, and my wife will have to yell at me and say, listen to their message, not all complaining about all their ahs and ums, right? But if somebody has a lot of them, it's just hard. I'll be brief. How many times have you heard someone say, well, I only have 5 minutes, so I'll be brief, and then 10 minutes later, you're leaving, they're still going on. So I would never say I'll be brief because you just don't know where you're going to end up. You may be longer than you think. I talked about I'm sorry you can't see this because my font is too small. Duh. Why didn't you make the font bigger? I mean, it's a simple solution. And I talked about just focus on the upper right panel. As far as font, use sans serif fonts, Helvetia, Verdana, Calibri. As the video said, don't use Times New Roman for slides. It's harder to read. So use one of the sans serif fonts when you're making slides. Power of the pause. As I said, sometimes you're nervous, you speed it up, you're going really fast. the audience is trying to digest everything you're saying, trying to intake your messages, and they can't because you're just rolling right along. Pause. That 1 or 2 seconds, which may seem like a long time to you, is not really a long time, and it gives the audience time to digest what you're talking about, and it will facilitate transitions also. But the middle one is very important. It allows the audience some time. And it will help to reduce filler words. That's probably the best thing you could try to do if you're using a lot of ahs and ums and so's. Instead of just trying to keep spilling those words, pause for a second or two. You don't have to say anything. And the audience will appreciate it. They'll enjoy that. Delivery and movement. Sometimes you're stuck behind the podium. The lectern. I just learned this a couple weeks ago. This brown thing up here, that's a lectern. This whole area up here, that's the podium. I'm on the podium. This is the podium, the area that you're speaking from. Lectern, podium. If you're stuck at the lectern, you're stuck there. I mean, you don't have a lavalier or microphone, so that's the way it is. I would, if I'm in that situation, after I've spoken for about 15 minutes, I'd ask the audience to just stand up and stretch. If I have a 30 or 45-minute talk, just tell them to stand up and take a 5 or 10-second stretch. Just let them move around. But if you have the stage, use it. I'm using it down here. I feel much more comfortable right here, closer to all of you, than I do when I'm locked behind that lectern. Use as much of the stage as you feel comfortable with. And move with purpose. Just like now, I'm moving to the left side of the room. That's my purpose. I want to get over here. Don't do the rocking thing. You've seen a lot of people give a talk, and they stand there. Right? And it's like they're doing a waltz or something like that. So move with purpose. That's important. And also, if you can help it, and I've been trying to do that, is don't show your back to the audience. So if you have to back up, back up. Don't turn around and walk, or turn sideways, but don't put your back totally to the audience. They usually don't like that. In the end, practice. That's my dog, Rowdy. He's one of my practice subjects. Right? So I practice in front of Rowdy and my other dog, Chloe, but she's not in the picture. Practice is hard, right? I find practice hard because you're preparing, you're organizing, you're building slides, you're trying to put all that stuff together, and then now you got to get up in front of somebody and actually run through the presentation. I find that very difficult. But I will guarantee you that if you do it, it will make your presentation better. There's absolutely no doubt. Every time I've seen someone go from point A with no practice and then do a practice run, their presentation is much better. And it's good to practice in front of other people in your area, other scientists that are, understand what you're talking about. But it's also good if you can find a few people or a dog that will listen to you that really don't have an understanding, a great understanding of what you do, because sometimes you'll get the best comments from them as far as what you can do to make things better. I can't say anymore, just practice. Without it, you're not going to give as good a presentation as you will with practice. Key messages. 3. Rule of 3. And I don't know if you've noticed it, but in my slides, I've often had 3 bullet points. I had 3 messages. 3 is what people remember. 3 Musketeers. Stop, drop, and roll. It's just 3. We remember things in 3s. Don't go 4, because people won't remember the 4th one. If you stand up here and say, I'm going to give you 5 reasons, people go, 5 reasons. How am I going to remember 5 reasons? They're not going to. 3. Rule of 3 is a key message. So choose 1 to 3 messages. The middle one's very important. Use Slide Sorter and edit those slides to get them trimmed as much as you can. And then you want to end on time. Let's see where I'm at. I've got about 12 minutes, and I'm close to being finished. Okay, you got the key messages? Focus, Slide Sorter, edit, 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 finish on time. You can give the crappiest talk in the world, right? But if you finish early, people go away feeling pretty good because they gained a few minutes in that day. But if you give a crappy talk and you're 10 minutes over, believe me, they'll remember you. They'll use you as an example in various situations. So what do I do next? I've given you some tips. You have to practice. That's key. You have to find a place where you can give presentations and talk. Present at every opportunity. That's a scary thought, isn't it? But whenever you have the chance to present, you should take it. And hope that you fail. Unless it means your job or something like that. You know what I mean? But if you fail a little bit in a presentation and you go away feeling, I just didn't do as good as I could, then that will make you work harder. You'll work a little harder the next time to make it better. Get feedback, critical. And I mean objective feedback. I remember when I used to work at GSK, someone would give a presentation, they'd come out of the room, 5 of their buddies would pat him on the back, "Oh, that was great, John," or "That was great, Susan." And I'm going, "Are you kidding me? Like that was just another death by PowerPoint." So you want objective feedback. It's nice to feel good, and sometimes feedback is difficult to take because it's just hard for all of us sometimes to take things that we don't want to hear. But objective feedback is good. And it doesn't, I'm not saying that objective feedback always has to be negative things. People should also be able to tell you what you're doing well so you don't have to spend so much time on that part of preparation. Lastly, if you have a Toastmasters club in your area, I would join it. And what is Toastmasters? It's an international organization that focuses on public speaking skills and leadership. Most major cities will have a lot of Toastmasters clubs. Clubs usually have 20 to 30 members. They meet twice a month or weekly. And what you get is the ability to give speeches to other people who want to make their speaking better also. And you will get feedback constantly. So if you're saying in 5 minutes, if you're saying 50 times, and somebody keeps telling you that, you'll reduce it. You'll just get better. And like anything else, it will take some energy to join one of these clubs and actually give speeches in front of people that you don't know. But I guarantee you, I've seen people come into a club and they were one of the worst speakers I've heard, and after they've given 10 speeches, significant improvement, just really improved. There's no other place that I know of where you could get feedback and give speeches as in Toastmasters. If your company has a training program, go to the training program. You know, if they have a day or a 2-day or a half-day workshop on speaking, do that. Watch videos. Watch TED videos, or just go to YouTube and watch good speakers on the video. You'll learn. With all that, in the end, you have to get up and talk. You know, it's like golfing. Somebody could show you how to swing that golf club all day long, but if you don't get out there and swing it yourself, you're just not going to get better. I've talked enough, and I finished 10 minutes ahead of my hour, but I'm happy if people want to have a few questions, I will try to answer them.
I have a question about answering questions. So when you get a question,
Right.
but you can't really understand exactly what they're asking.
Mm-hmm.
That seems kind of big. A lot of times the question ends up being less of a question and more of a point. How do you answer a question if you don't completely understand what they're asking?
I'd ask them to repeat the question. And you might make them feel better and say, "Well, I understand kind of what you're asking, but I'm not absolutely certain. Could you repeat that?" I just ask them to repeat it. And thanks for bringing up questions, because I didn't do anything here with Q&A. Right. What I don't like in a meeting, and if I'm chairing a session, I don't do it anymore, but when I used to, you get people who say, I have 3 questions. Sorry, you only have 1 question. Because as the speaker, it's not fair to the speaker, even 2 questions. Watch when people get asked 2 questions, you'll see what they do. They'll answer the last question first, usually 90% of the time. So if you're ever in that situation, don't allow people to ask more than a single question, and that helps too, because sometimes it's those double questions that get mangled and you don't know what someone is actually asking. The other thing, of course, is if there's not a microphone in the audience, like we don't have one today, and I don't have people coming up to this one, is repeat their question. If you do understand it, just repeat it because you have the mic so that everybody in the room could hear. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know, If you don't know, you don't know. And say, I don't know, that's interesting. I'll try to get some information on that. And you could usually tell if a person wants to be contentious or they're just really asking you a question because they're interested. Yep.
When you're preparing, let's say, in your speech,
Mm-hmm.
you recommend like writing down word for word what you're going to say and just memorize the whole thing. And after so you write down bullet points and then just say it.
Well, my recommendation is it depends where you're starting from. My recommendation is do what you feel comfortable with. Because if you're not comfortable with getting up without having it written down, then I would write it down. Certainly as you progress, you become a better speaker, you're not going to need any notes. You won't need things written down usually. But in the beginning, sometimes it's not a bad thing to have some notes. And like we said before, especially when you're starting your presentation, to have that first maybe minute written out so you could get into the flow of the room, because that's when you're probably going to be the most nervous. So do what's comfortable, what feels good to you.
Do you have any practical tips how to practice the modulation of your voice?
Not really. My best practical tip would be go Google that and look for some voice exercises. Mm-hmm. But I would say one thing that will help you know if you're doing it or not doing it is to get videotaped. And believe me, when you get videotaped making a presentation, it is very tough to go look at that videotape because you see yourself then as everyone else is seeing you or hearing you. But that really helps you because so you go in a dark room by yourself, you know what I mean? You turn it on and you just listen, and you'll see how you're doing. But my shorter answer is Google it, or their speech coaches will help with those types of things. I don't know that much about actually the exercises one would use. Mm-hmm.
So do you have any advice for those situations when there's a complete audio-visual failure and the computer crashes, the slides turn off, and you're left with an audience of 1,000 people?
Right. Mm-hmm. Be prepared for that. That's my advice, because it can happen. So have a little story ready. Well, hopefully someone comes to help you. That happened to me a week or 2 ago, and luckily I was at a technical place, and so there were a number of people in the audience that were very good with the electronics. And so I just talked about some things for a few minutes, and while they were working on the computer situation. And what I did in my situation was I started talking about speaking tips. I said, let me tell you a few things about preparing slides, right? So have a story ready. Always good to have a backup plan, just a bit of a story about something. I had one picture of my dog that I showed. Good tip is, if you have a pet, dog in particular, because most people like dogs, not everybody, but most do. If you could show a picture of that dog in your presentation somewhere, that's good. The first time I learned that is I was giving a talk, I believe it was in Seattle, showed a picture of my dogs, got done with my talk. There were 3 people lined up to talk to me, and the first thing each of them said was, wow, that was a neat picture of your dogs. And that allowed me to then say, well, do you have pets? and then it just created a dialogue between us. And those people may not have come up to me if they didn't have that icebreaker. Kids don't work too well unless you've really got a good picture of your child or some. But animals tend to work, dogs in particular, or even probably a cat if it's the right picture. But it will, anything you could do to make a connection with that audience and a little bonding is good. Yeah. I'm trying to think if I left anything out, but I'm going to repeat them again. Focus down to 1 to 3 messages, uncluttered slides, edit, 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 keep looking at them, and finish on time. 3 biggies.
So speaking of uncluttered slides, how do you prepare for a speech when you want the uncluttered slide, but your boss, the person you're presenting for, wants the super cluttered slide? How do you make that compromise?
I'd have a dialogue with them. Make what you think is that simpler set of slides, and then ask them and say, is this not getting the point across? Am I missing something by not having more information? I just, tell me if I'm wrong, right? I've been out of the lab now for about 3 years or so. But I believe in the information age, people's attention span is Zippo, right? If you don't catch somebody in 5, 10, 15 seconds, their mind's racing to the next thing. So I would probably say that to my boss, too. You're telling me to put all this stuff in. I'm not sure I can hold the attention of people with that. People just have short attention spans. They want the bottom line, right? And I think most scientists are like that nowadays. There's just too much information that if they really want to dig into the details, then they could talk to you later or somebody. So I would argue a little, to have a dialogue is the term we used to use. Have a dialogue with your boss about that.
Regarding that question, so PowerPoint obviously has the animation features.
Right.
How much do you recommend using those animations to deal with complex data sets?
I'd say use them if you're comfortable and you have it under control. You know what I mean? But unless that animation is making and supporting one of your key points, you have to question, does it help me? I've seen many animations where someone futzes around a bit and then they say, look at this movement through the cell. Yeah, that's okay, but it didn't move me, you know what I mean? So you have to be careful, I believe, with animation. That's probably not a great answer, but I'm not a big animation fan unless that animation really is crucial to making and supporting a point that you're focusing on. Then it's valuable. Anybody else? We're right at 1 o'clock, so we finished on time. I did my yellow thing that showed 0, 0, 0. Remember, that's another one. Finish on time or finish a little early. Because if you're at a conference and you put the chair in a bad situation because you start off that session by going 5 or 10 minutes overtime, they don't like you. You may not get invited back unless you got really good data. All right, thanks everybody. I hope you could use some of these tips in the future when you're putting future presentations together. If you want, I had let me see if I can get there real quick. Hold on 1 second. Oh, I have to start it. Does anybody want my email address? Because I could send you a 4-pager that I put together that encapsulates a lot of these tips. Because if you go onto Google and look for speaking tips, speaking hints, thousands and thousands of articles. And what I've encapsulated, I believe, today and in this article, it's in a smaller space. Does anybody want my email address? Okay, then you'll have to wait 1 more minute, and I'm going to put it back. It was on the first slide. Thanks, everyone.